When you think about success, most people immediately look for methods, strategies, and secrets. They ask, what's a formula? What's the step-by-step plan? What's the shortcut? But here's what I learned a long time ago. Before you ask how, you've got to answer why. Because reasons create the drive. And without the drive, even the best methods won't matter. Think about it. Every day, people are given advice. They're told what books to read, what habits to practice, what businesses to start. Yet most of them don't follow through. Not because the advice was bad, not because the answers weren't available, but because they didn't have a reason strong enough to follow through. It's not the lack of information that holds people back. It's the lack of motivation. And motivation doesn't come from the answers. It comes from the reasons. Let me give you an example. Imagine a young man who says he wants to be wealthy. You ask him why, and he says, well, because it sounds nice. That's not a strong reason. If sounding nice is all he's got, then the first time business gets tough, he'll quit. The first time he has a rough week, he'll back away. But now imagine another man who says, I want to be wealthy because I promised my mother she'll never have to work another day in her life. I want to send my kids to the best schools. I want to make sure my family never goes hungry again. Now that man has reasons. Do you see the difference? The second man doesn't need anyone to remind him to work hard. His reasons will do the reminding. His reasons create the drive. You see, the drive to achieve doesn't come from outside. It comes from within. The world can offer you opportunities, but it can't give you the drive to pursue them. That's your job. And the way you create it is by building strong reasons. The stronger your reasons, the greater your energy. The bigger your reasons, the greater your persistence. That's why two people can start at the same place, with the same resources, the same knowledge, even the same talent, and end up worlds apart. The one with the reasons will always outlast the one without. Now, here's the beauty of it. Reasons don't have to be complicated. They just have to be personal and powerful. Maybe your reason is your family. Maybe it's freedom. Maybe it's a desire to prove something to yourself, that you're capable of more than you've been settling for. Whatever it is, once it becomes real to you, it will create a drive that no setback can extinguish. And let me warn you, reasons must grow as you grow. If your reasons stay small, your life will stay small. If your reasons get bigger, your drive will grow stronger. When I was young, my reasons were small. I wanted a better car, a nicer apartment, some new clothes. But those reasons weren't strong enough to keep me moving when life got tough. Then I discovered something. When I started thinking about the kind of man I wanted to become, the kind of contribution I wanted to make, the kind of life I want to give my family, suddenly my reasons became bigger. And when my reasons grew, so did my drive. So here's the question you must ask yourself. What's my reason? Don't chase the answers yet. Don't chase the methods, the formulas, the shortcuts. First, build your reasons. Because once your reasons are strong enough, the drive will come. And with the drive, you'll find every answer you need. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. The second I closed my eyes, all I could see was Gregory's smug face. That little smirk Brad gave me like he just scored the winning touchdown. And Susan standing there silently like a sheep too scared to leave the herd. $10,000. 30 days. That's what they thought would break me. That's what they thought would make me pack up and run. But they didn't know who I was. They didn't know what I'd been through. I've faced worse threats than some neighborhood bureaucrats with a God complex. I've had mortars rain down on me in the dead of night. I had enemies with rifles and hatred in their hearts hunting me in deserts halfway across the world. And these clowns thought a piece of paper and a deadline would scare me? No. If anything, it lit a fire in me I hadn't felt in years. The fire of a man who refuses to lose. The first thing I did was pull out the notice they'd given me and read every damn word. I studied it like I was back in the field reviewing an op plan, because that's exactly what this was, an operation. They listed every so-called violation. Paint chipping, weeds in the backyard, the old fence leaning a few inches too far, a shed that apparently didn't meet community standards. Half the stuff they wrote was either exaggerated or flat out made up. Then there was the administrative fees, enforcement costs, and Interest charges, they tacked on to balloon the total to that magic 10 grand. It was a shakedown, pure and simple. And I wasn't about to be their mark. I grabbed a legal pad and started taking notes. Rule number 1 in war: know your enemy. And right now, Gregory Vaughn and his little HOA mafia were my enemy. I needed to understand how they operated, where their power came from, and most importantly, how to take it away. I spent hours on the HOA website, digging through their bylaws, their budgets, their board meeting minutes. Turns out, they weren't just drunk on power. They were also drowning in debt. The association was bleeding money on some big community improvement project. That never actually happened. Tens of thousands spent, no receipts attached. Classic corruption. Gregory had been president for 5 years, and in that time, dues had gone up 30%, but nothing in the neighborhood had improved. That told me one thing. Gregory wasn't just an egomaniac. He was probably stealing from his own neighbors. That little nugget of truth put a grin on my face for the first time that day. But information wasn't enough. I needed leverage. I needed a way to hit them where it hurt, and with people like Gregory, that was always money and reputation. The problem was, I didn't have either. My bank account had maybe $312 left in it, and my reputation in this neighborhood was whatever Gregory told people it was. So I had to think like the soldier I used to be. When you're outnumbered and outgunned, you don't fight head-on. You outsmart, outmaneuver, and outlast. You use what the enemy doesn't expect. And that's when an idea started forming. A dangerous, crazy idea, the kind of plan that would either make me a legend or land me in jail. Maybe both. The next morning, I started making calls. Not to lawyers, not to banks. Those were losing battles I couldn't afford to fight. I called people who owed me favors. People from the old days. Contractors, real estate guys, even a couple of fellow vets who'd gone into business after the service. One name led to another, and before long, I had a meeting set up with a guy named Mason. Mason wasn't just any guy. He was a property shark, the kind of man who could smell an opportunity from a mile away. We met at a greasy diner off the highway, and when I told what I had in mind, he leaned back, grinned, and said 6 words that changed everything. You know, that might just work. Here's the thing about HOAs most people don't know. They're corporations. And like any corporation, they can go broke, they can be sued, and most importantly, they can be bought. The land, the common areas, the rights to the neighborhood, they all have value. And when that value is tied up with a bunch of unpaid debts and mismanaged funds, someone like Mason can swoop in and pick the bones clean. That's exactly what we were about to do. If Gregory wanted to play hardball, I was going to bring the whole damn stadium. But before we got that far, I had to play my part. I had to act like the broke, defeated veteran they thought I was. I let a couple days go by without saying a word. Then, just when they thought they had me cornered, I called Gregory. I told him I wanted to meet man to man, see if we could work something out. He agreed immediately. Probably thought I was about to beg for mercy. We met at the neighborhood clubhouse, this little building they use for board meetings and holiday parties. He was there with Brad and Susan, sitting at this long table like they were a damn Supreme Court panel. I walked in calm, casual, like I didn't have a care in the world. Greg, I said, nodding at him. Brad. Susan. Mr. Carter, Gregory said, that smug smile glued to his face. I appreciate you coming. Yeah, I said, pulling out a chair. I figured we could talk like reasonable men. Gregory leaned forward, hands clasped. Of course. We'd like nothing more than to resolve this amicably. Have you secured the funds? I almost laughed. Not exactly, I said, but I have a proposal. Brad snorted. This ought to be good. I ignored him. You see, I don't have 10 grand lying around. Hell, I barely have $10. But I do have something else. Something worth more than money. Gregory raised an eyebrow. And what would that be? Time, I said. Patience. And friends in very interesting places. He didn't like that answer. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. He wanted me scared, desperate. Instead, I was calm, almost cocky. And that scared him more than anything. He tried to recover, plastering on that fake smile again. "Well," he said slowly, "unless your friends can write a check, I'm afraid there's nothing to discuss." "That's what you think," I said, standing up. "But let me ask you something, Greg. How do you think the other homeowners would feel if they knew where their money was going? How do you think they'd react if someone started asking questions about that community improvement project that cost 40 grand but never happened?" His face went pale. Just for a second, but I saw it, and that's when I knew I had him. "See you around, Greg," I said, walking out the door. "Tell Brad to wipe that grin off his face before it gets him in trouble." By the time I hit the parking lot, I was already on the phone with Mason, setting things in motion. The first shot had been fired. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about taking down Gregory Vaughn and his little kingdom. And when I was done, I wasn't just going to keep my house. I was going to own half the damn neighborhood. The real fight began the day after that little meeting at the clubhouse. Gregory thought I was bluffing. Thought I was just some bitter vet blowing smoke because he'd cornered me. That was his first mistake, underestimating me. His second mistake? Thinking his power was absolute. Men like Gregory always think they're untouchable, always think the rules bend for them. And that's why they never see the hammer coming until it smashes their little kingdom to dust. I spent that night at my kitchen table with Mason, spreading out documents like we were planning a military strike. Because, in a way, we were. Mason came armed with files, spreadsheets, and a laptop that looked like it had every real estate record in the county loaded onto it. He'd been digging since the moment I called him, and what he found was pure gold. The HOA wasn't just in debt, they were drowning. Gregory had taken out a line of credit in the association's name to fund that phantom community improvement project, and he'd been siphoning funds ever since. Landscaping contracts with no invoices. Maintenance fees for services never performed. It was a goddamn shell game, and Gregory was the man pulling the strings. The HOA owed nearly $220,000 to multiple creditors, and foreclosure on the common areas was already looming like a storm on the horizon. If those creditors called in the loans, the HOA would have no choice but to sell assets, parks, lots, maybe even sections of the neighborhood. And that's where Mason came in. "You see this?" Mason said, pointing at a line on the spreadsheet. "They've got 6 months tops before this house of cards collapses. Maybe less if someone gives the creditors a little encouragement." I grinned. "And who do you think might do that?" He smirked. "You, my friend." The plan was simple in theory, brutal in execution. Push the HOA into financial freefall, then swoop in and buy up the pieces for pennies on the dollar. Mason would handle the legal side, the bidding, the paperwork. All I had to do was keep Gregory distracted. Keep him thinking he had the upper hand while the ground crumbled beneath his feet. And maybe, just maybe, twist the knife a little along the way. Because this wasn't just about winning. It was about making Gregory feel every ounce of pain he tried to put on me. The next move was intel. I needed dirt on Gregory, on Brad, on anyone sitting on that board. Power doesn't come from titles. It comes from secrets. And every man with power has a secret he doesn't want the world to know. So I started digging. Social media, public records, old news archives. And what I found, well, let's just say it was better than I could have hoped. Gregory had a son, a college kid with a taste for fast cars and faster women. Problem was, those cars weren't paid for with Gregory's salary. They were paid for with HOA money. Credit card statements, Venmo transfers, all leading back to the association account. If the homeowners found out, Gregory wouldn't just lose his position. He'd lose everything. Brad wasn't much better. The guy had 3 DUIs buried in sealed court records and a history of harassment complaints from tenants at property he managed years ago. As for Susan, she was clean. Nervous, scared, but clean. The kind of person who wouldn't stick around once the ship started sinking. That gave me an idea. A big one. But first, I needed to rattle Gregory's cage. So I started small. Anonymous tips to a couple of homeowners about financial irregularities in the HOA budget. A few screenshots of meeting minutes with suspicious expenses highlighted in red. I made sure it looked like it came from an inside source. Someone on the board who'd grown a conscience. Within a week, the neighborhood Facebook group was on fire. People were asking questions, demanding answers. Gregory tried to shut it down, posting some long-winded explanation about necessary expenditures for community growth. But the damage was done. The whispers had started, and whispers have a way of turning into roars. Then came phase 2, the creditors. Mason pulled some strings, made some calls, and suddenly those lenders weren't so patient anymore. Letters started hitting the HOA mailbox. Notices of default. Warnings of legal action. Gregory panicked. I could see it in the way he carried himself at the next meeting. Gone was the smug confidence, the fake politician smile. He was sweating bullets, trying to keep the wolves at bay while pretending everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. It was falling apart, and fast. That's when I struck. I walked into that next HOA meeting like I owned the damn place, because soon I would. The room was packed with homeowners, all of them buzzing with rumors about missing funds and shady deals. Gregory sat at the head of the table, trying to hold court, but the moment I walked in, all eyes turned to me. I didn't say a word at first, just stood there, letting the silence stretch, letting Gregory feel the noose tighten. "Mr. Carter," Gregory said finally, his voice tight. "This is a closed meeting." "Not tonight, it ain't," I said, stepping forward. "Tonight, everybody deserves to hear the truth." And then I dropped the bomb. Every dirty secret, every shady transaction, every missing dollar. I laid it all out piece by piece, with the kind of precision that only comes from a man who spent weeks preparing for this moment. I showed them the documents, the transfers, the fake contracts. I showed them the receipts for Gregory's son's sports car, paid for with their money. The room erupted. People shouting, demanding answers. Some even calling for Gregory to step down on the spot. Brad tried to play tough, tried to shut me down, but then I pulled out his DUI records and watched the color drain for his face. Susan, she didn't say a word, just got up and walked out, tears in her eyes. She knew it was over. Gregory tried to fight, tried to spin it, but the more he talked, the deeper he sank. And then, when the chaos was at its peak, I delivered the killing blow. You know what happens when an HOA collapses under financial fraud. I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The assets get liquidated. The parks, the lots, the rights. And guess who's standing by with the cash to buy it all? I didn't have to say the name. Mason stepped forward from the back of the room. Sharp suit, sharper smile. The look on Gregory's face when he saw him. That was the moment I lived for. The moment the king realized the crown wasn't his anymore. By the end of that week, Gregory was gone. Brad, too. The HOA was bankrupt, dissolved under the weight of its own corruption. And Mason? He bought up half the neighborhood for less than the price of Gregory's son's car. But here's the best part. Mason didn't keep it. He handed me the keys. Not literally, but close enough. I became the managing partner of the newly formed neighborhood association. Me, the broke vet they tried to crush. The man they thought didn't belong. Now I own the very streets they once lorded over. And as I stood there on my porch that night, watching the sun set over the neighborhood, I couldn't help but smile. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning. It's making them watch you take everything they thought was theirs. I should have known Gregory wouldn't go down easy. Men like him never do. They cling to power like a drowning man clings to a piece of driftwood, even when the ocean's already claimed them. I thought it was over after the HOA dissolved, after Mason signed the papers and handed me control. But that's the thing about enemies. You never turn your back on them until you're sure they're finished. And Gregory? He was just getting desperate. The first sign came 2 days after the big meeting. I was out back fixing the busted gate when a black SUV rolled past the house slow. Too slow to be casual. Tinted windows, chrome rims, the same one Gregory drove when he strutted up my driveway the first time. I caught a glimpse of him behind the wheel, staring dead at me before speeding off. I figure it was just him licking his wounds, trying to scare me with a little drive-by intimidation. But then my phone started ringing. First it was Susan. Poor woman sounded like she'd aged 10 years in 48 hours. She told me Gregory was calling board members, homeowners, anyone who'd listen, spinning some story about how I was a real criminal, how I'd hacked the HOA accounts and planted fake evidence to frame him. Classic projection. Then Brad called, not to warn me, but to threaten me. Said Gregory had friends in high places and that I'd better watch my back. I laughed in his face. Friends in high places don't save you when the bank freezes your assets and your own neighbors want to tar and feather you. But Gregory wasn't just running his mouth. He was making moves. Real moves. I found out the next day when I drove into town to grab groceries and saw a goddamn billboard on the highway. Carter the con man stole from veterans, lied to you. My name, in bold letters, next to a grainy picture of me in uniform. He must have hired some PR firm, because within hours, my social media was blowing up with hate comments, fake news articles, and even a couple of local bloggers calling me a fraud exploiting the system. I didn't even know bloggers still existed, but Gregory found them. He was trying to destroy me, and for a split second, I almost let it get to me. Almost. But then I remembered who I was. I'm not some scared little HOA puppet. I'm a soldier. I've been through hell, and this was just another battlefield. So I did what I do best. I adapted, I improvised, and I hit back twice as hard. First, I went nuclear on the truth. Mason had all the paperwork, all the receipts, and a friend in local media who owed him a favor. We didn't just leak the story. We dropped it like a bomb. Full expose on Gregory Vaughn. Financial fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, misuse of HOA funds, the whole 9 yards. We backed it up with documents, bank statements, and testimony from homeowners who'd had enough of his crap. By the time the article went live, it wasn't just a neighborhood scandal. It was a county-wide spectacle. Local news picked it up, then state outlets. Gregory's name was everywhere, and not in the way he wanted. The fallout was brutal. Gregory's little PR smear campaign collapsed overnight under the weight of his own sins. His accounts got frozen. The sheriff's office opened an investigation. I even heard the FBI might have sniffed around once they saw the numbers involved. And Brad? He disappeared faster than a paycheck on payday. One day he was barking threats. The next his house was up for sale, and his SUV was gone. Guess he didn't want to stick around for the subpoenas. But Gregory wasn't done, not yet. The man was like a wounded animal, and wounded animals are dangerous. He started showing up in places I didn't expect. At the diner where Mason and I met. At the hardware store. Just standing there, watching me. One time, he even followed me home, parked down the street for hours. I could feel his eyes on me every time I stepped outside. He wanted me rattled. He wanted me scared. But all he did was piss me off. So I set the trap. One thing about guys like Gregory, they think they're the smartest man in the room. They can't resist an opportunity to win, even when it's a setup. So I gave him one. I called him, told him I was willing to make things right, that maybe we could settle this off the books. I told him to meet me at an old warehouse on the edge of town, a place I knew had security cameras and a couple friends waiting nearby. Friends who didn't mind wearing a wire for the sheriff's office. He showed up right on time. Slick suit, fake smile, thinking he was about to flip the script. What he didn't know was that I'd already handed the DA enough evidence to bury him. And this meeting, this was the final nail in his coffin. "Greg," I said when he walked in, "glad you came." "Cut the crap, Carter," he sneered. "What's your offer?" "My offer," I said, leaning back against a crate. "You walk away. You stop this little crusade, and maybe, just maybe, I don't press for maximum charges." He laughed. Actually laughed. "You think you're in control here? I've got people." "That's funny." I cut him off, because the only people listening to you right now are wearing badges. His face went white as the warehouse door opened, and 2 deputies walked in, badges glinting under the flickering lights. I'll never forget the look on his face when they cuffed him. All that arrogance, all that fake power, crumbling in real time. It was better than any medal I'd ever earned. They hauled him out, and just like that, it was over. No more threats. No more games. Gregory Vaughn was finished, and I was finally free. But here's the thing about freedom. It's sweeter when you've earned it. And standing there in that empty warehouse, watching the taillights of that patrol car disappear into the night, I realized something. I didn't just win. I owned the battlefield. And soon, I'd own everything Gregory ever thought was his. When the dust finally settled, I stood on ground I never thought I'd claim. The same streets where I once walked as the broke, unwanted veteran were now mine. Not just in spirit, but on paper. Half the neighborhood, legally under my control, and the other half answering to me by default. Funny how life works, isn't it? One minute you're staring down eviction. The next you're signing documents that make you the man everyone answers to. Gregory Vaughn tried to bury me under $10,000 of bullshit fines, and now he's sitting in a cell while I decide whether the clubhouse becomes a community center or a damn cigar lounge. Tell me that isn't the sweetest revenge you've ever heard. But it wasn't just about property. It was about respect, something I'd fought for my whole life, and something Gregory tried to take away. He thought power came from rules and regulations, from holding people hostage with bylaws. I knew better. Power comes from grit, from refusing to quit when the world tries to crush you. Power comes from standing your ground when everyone else bows their head. And standing there that day, keys in hand, signatures inked, I realized something. I didn't just win this fight. I rewrote the battlefield. The day the takeover became official, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word spread faster than wildfire. Carter, the broke vet they tried to kick out, now runs the show. People came up to me, shaking my hand, thanking me for taking down the tyrants. They called me a hero, a savior, a man who did what needed to be done. And yeah, I smiled, I nodded, but deep down I knew the truth. I didn't do this to be a hero. I did this because some men need to learn the hard way that you don't push a soldier into a corner. You don't back him against a wall and expect him not to fight. Gregory learned that lesson too late, and now his kingdom is mine. I walked to the neighborhood that evening, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the sky like a victory banner. The manicured lawns, the pristine driveways, the cookie-cutter houses, all of it used to feel like a prison to me. A reminder that I didn't belong. Not anymore. Now, when I look at those streets, I saw something else. Control. Not the kind Gregory had, born from greed and arrogance, but the kind that comes from survival, from clawing your way out of the dirt and taking what the world said you couldn't have. And damn, it felt good. Later that night, I sat on my porch with a glass of bourbon in one hand and the deed papers in the other. Mason had already moved on to his next big deal, but not before telling me one thing that stuck with me. You're not just a homeowner anymore, Carter. You're a king. I laughed when he said it. But as I watched the streetlights flicker on and the neighborhood settle into its quiet suburban rhythm, I realized he was right. I didn't ask for this crown, but I sure as hell earned it. And as for Gregory, last I heard, he was making friend behind bars, trying to cut a deal that isn't coming. Some say he's still talking big, still claiming he'll get out and make me pay. Maybe he will. Maybe one day I'll see that black SUV again in my rearview mirror. But if that day comes, I'll be ready. Because men like Gregory never learn, and men like me, we never stop fighting. So here I am, a poor veteran no more. They wanted $10,000. Instead, I took their kingdom. And if you think that's the end of the story, well, let's just say this. The neighborhood may look quiet tonight, but war leaves its mark. And I've still got plenty of ammo left.